This episode is brought to you by Competitive Edge Research and Communication. Competitive Edge Research and Communication is San Diego's premier polling firm dedicated to quality research since 1987. John Nienstedt, president of Competitive Edge, proudly supports Voice of San Diego and other local civic organizations. Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm here with my friend, Sara Libby.
What's up, my man? Did I do a good Keats?
Pretty good. Andy Keats is out. I'll let him tell everybody about it, but my goodness, he's had a summer.
Yeah. I mean, if you remember just last week, he was a little despondent.
Yes.
He had family members, threatened by this hurricane and was very worried about them.
Mm-hmm.
And then things got better very quickly.
Yes. We'll let him share it. But boy, he's got a big story, new house, all these stuff going on. Sometimes your life just goes through big transitions.
Mm-hmm.
Including, speaking of transitions, the Chargers made their debut as the Los Angeles Chargers. There was that hilarious moment when the timeout happened on the first game of the Chargers against the Broncos. And they said, timeout, San Diego. Nobody can shake it. And it was a classic, terrible Chargers game. But I couldn't help but notice that Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti really just, the type of trash talking that's like the most brutal, in my opinion, is the kind that's like sympathetic and like
a head pat
and just deeply condescending and full of pity. Like that's the worst. It's one thing to like talk smack, but it's another thing to like just feel bad for them in a way that just makes them feel so small, right? And Eric Garcetti was speaking to a radio station in Los Angeles, and he said about the Chargers, and my heart goes out to folks in San Diego. Like, thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. And he said, basically, we just didn't want to give the NFL any money, and the NFL gave us two teams.
Yeah.
Again.
It's very like, keep your head up, little buddy.
Yeah, congratulations on that hat trick. And then this is the one that gets me. We embrace any team that comes. We're certainly happy to have the Chargers in LA, but I think we could have been happy with just the Rams too.
Oh, that's twisting the knife. That's bad.
It's just, this whole thing is just so bizarre. It's like watching that show or that game was bizarre. I think it's just the NFL is bizarre these days, but also the touchdown Los Angeles is just so weird.
I'm just really loving the amount of like merciless Chargers trolling. Like obviously the ref didn't mean to say San Diego or whatever, but just like the photos of the empty stands and whatnot, I can't get enough of them.
Yeah, it's and then there's billboards. This guy Joseph McRae, a Chargers fan, raised $10,000 on GoFundMe to put up billboards just trolling the Chargers up there. Look. They're in it, obviously, for a 20-year plan, right? Like mass extreme family wealth they're trying to build. So I think they're actually more in danger of the NFL not being popular than they are of them not making it in LA. But it's just glorious to watch.
It feels good.
And I think, there's all this argument still about could they have stayed or whatever. Look, basically, the NFL wants these giant palaces. They're very expensive. And San Diego couldn't afford it. That's it. And the rest is just a game of hot potato about who has to tell fans that, And so that's the way to understand that. All right, we have a lot of news pieces this week, and Councilman Chris Ward came into the podcast studio to talk about the big news of the week with the homeless issue, which has really hit a nerve and a new level of urgency, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So talk about that. Also, big decision in the area of marijuana regulations. First, I wanted to talk about a little wonky topic. When I first started covering pensions 12 years ago, 13 years ago, there was a lot of discussion, obviously, about the beleaguered San Diego City Employees Pension Fund. And the big worry for pensions always is if you have employees that you have to give pensions to, you're going to have to pay them. And at that time, the city was...
It is a big worry.
Yeah, and at that time, the city was putting, $30-40 million a year into its pension system. Now it's paying about $320 million into its pension system. And that was the big concern. That's $300 million that's not going to fire, to police, to roads, to homeless shelters, all these things that the city provides, right? So at the heart of that discussion is one simple figure. It's how much the city or this pension fund expects to earn in the investment market, right? There's three sources of money to a pension fund. The employees contribute, the city contributes, and then however much those two earn in the investment market.
Right.
Well, the big decision last week was that the pension board has lowered the assumption of how much it thinks it'll make, which affects all kinds of things. It means less. It means that both the employees and the city have to contribute more, and it means that the debt they owe gets bigger. So they went from assuming that they would get 7% a year to assuming they're going to get 6.5%. They're going to lower that over the next 2 years. That's significant.
Yeah.
So basically what it means most immediately is that the police and fire are going to have to are going to have to contribute about 1.8% more to their pensions than they were, which means their take-home pay goes down.
I don't see that being a problem for them. They don't seem like the types to be vocal about pay issues.
Yeah, they're probably going to be fine with that. So in other words, right now they're in negotiations with the mayor about a new contract, and that means that just to keep their take-home pay where it's at, they have to get a 2% raise. That's just the start. And so they're making the huge case that their retention and recruitment is in the tank, that the staffing is below what they need minimum to send out on these patrols, stuff like that. And so just to get them whole, they would need a 2% raise. So, and this is already a big crunch coming down. The city budget next year looks bad.
Yeah, and it's like as the economy is improving overall, but we're still seeing this big crunch because of just this one issue.
Yeah, exactly. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And so that was at the heart of the pension issue going forward. Now, they did a tweak. So not only they lowered this thing, but they also did a tweak so that the pain of it would be pushed out over the next couple of years. I'm not going to try to explain that. Not sure I totally understand it. But so it's not just that they're lowering that rate, but significant change no matter what. All right, Jonah Valdez, our contributor, he did a piece this week, caught my attention. These same police officers are putting the kibosh on alcohol permits. Yeah,
so we've covered in the past a lot of the jockeying that goes on behind the scenes with alcohol permits. It's really fascinating. And what we've seen up until now is like other stores objecting to permits. Like if you own a corner store, you don't want a 7-Eleven going in across the street because it's competition. And so you say, oh, it'll cause safety issues and whatnot and get everybody riled up. But this is actually coming from the police as an attempt to curb crime, and their rationale is, I guess it makes sense. The fewer bars and restaurants we have that have people out late at night causing, mischief.
Yeah, mayhem.
Marauding. Shenanigans.
Yeah.
The less we're going to be having to break up fights and deal with people.
Yeah, the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control gets the final say, right? But the police get to they vet each one of these, and they basically say we're going to oppose or not. And what's happening is they're opposing everyone that's coming to them. And not only they're citing the crime in places like Ocean Beach and downtown, but they're also saying that they don't have the staffing to process these, right?
Yeah, that's what was really surprising is that, so apparently the police always have taken a proactive role in these permits. And what generally happens is they oppose them on like a conditional basis. So they say, well, we oppose this unless you scale back your hours, or we oppose this unless you decide not to have live music, or just something that's going to scale things down a little bit, keep it cool, keep everybody mellow.
Yeah.
And now they're just opposing them outright, saying, we do not want this new bar. We don't care what your hours are. We don't care what your business plan looks like. No.
That's just it.
Yeah.
People will still be able to find drinks in San Diego.
It seems like they might. But, we heard from business owners and people in places like East Village that are trying to build up these new emerging neighborhoods saying like, well, we need to have, new businesses in order for this to get off the ground. And they have a public safety argument, too. They say that, the more there are open storefronts and, people moving into neighborhoods and families and things like that, the less crime there will be.
Yeah. Andy hates it, so since he's not here, I'll do it. Is when you talk about like when I was in Hamburg, Germany, I mean, like walking around late at night, like it's because the street's alive. It's like the more you close things off, even obviously bars and stuff can get out of hand, but we've got to have some sort of balance between that and just shutting it down.
Yeah, and not every neighborhood is the gas lamp,
Yeah.
So like there's a difference between a neighborhood that has some bars and some restaurants and some businesses and some apartments and others that are just more like nightlife scenes.
Right. All right. An update on another topic that we followed last week and explained in the last few weeks. We were wondering what the city would do as far as the marijuana regulations, and we're going to talk about this with Councilman Chris Ward when he comes in. But they endorsed pretty much everything that the marijuana supply chain businesses and interest groups wanted, which was not only to not do a limit per city council district of how many businesses could be cultivating, manufacturing, producing, or distributing or testing marijuana, but said that limit, which would have been 2 per council district or a total of 18, should itself be at 40. And it should be citywide, that these don't have to be per council district. Ward himself made that motion, but huge win for the cannabis industry. It was also big because they didn't even put a buffer. There was worry that they would say, yeah, you can have more marijuana businesses, but they have to be even 100 feet away from each other, which means like if you had a testing and distribution facility like right next to each other, that wouldn't be allowed. And that's kind of a big deal because there's some landlords just don't want it. And so the landlords that are okay with it, then you might want to put 2 businesses in that same building or whatever. And so that's now allowed. So they got everything they wanted.
Yeah, essentially. And we've seen this be a problem in smaller cities like La Mesa and Lemon Grove, where the restrictions are such that there's basically like no places that they can operate because there are just too many rules and there's too many daycares and too many schools that effectively like bans them. So yeah, there could be, a lot in places like Mira Mesa or Otay where they have the room and the capacity for that type of thing.
Right. The one thing that they did not deal with, or at least change, was the deliveries. So there was a big push during this discussion for them to reconsider their decision, the city council's decision, to limit the delivery services to just the licensed facilities. And what they decided to do is leave it. And that means that the stage is now set for a massive crackdown on these delivery services.
Right.
Which, the police chief was pretty upset about these regulations coming, so perhaps she can console herself now that she gets to shut down
just going nuts.
hundreds of businesses like that, because that's what the city's decided. And we asked Ward about that, and I think one of the interesting things he said was, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's crack down on it."
Mm-hmm.
So that's in store. All right, you're our designated Sacramento guru.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about this week. Why is this week so important?
So this week, Friday specifically, by midnight is when the legislature has to pass everything. So there's a lot of going back and forth. Some bills have already passed the Senate, and they need to pass the Assembly, and vice versa. And then, amendments get added along the way, and they have to go back and vote on the amendments. And all of that has to be taken care of by Friday. And then there will be another month for Jerry Brown to make decisions on everything. So we're really getting into crunch time, and there's a lot of stuff that still hasn't been decided. We're here on Thursday. You'll be hearing this on Friday. One of the big ones is Senator Tony Atkins' big housing bill, which would fund affordable housing by charging a fee for certain real estate documents. And that's pretty controversial. We've seen like the gas tax pass, and I think lawmakers are wary of putting all these new fees on people and having a backlash from that. But at the same time, like, where are we going to build money have money to build houses for people? That's been a big problem.
Yeah, so this would be like a fee if you buy a house on just getting it done. It'd be one in a long list of fees that you have to pay to get that process complete.
So that's one where we're nearing the finish line, and it's not certain that the votes are there for that one.
She's looking for some Republicans, right?
Yeah, so she basically needs so she basically needs every Democrat's support. And it's not clear that she has it. So that's one that's going to come down to the wire. And there's a chance that it could spill over and impact other housing bills, which is a big priority for the legislature. But one thing that has already passed that obviously is we've been keeping a close eye on is AB 805, which is Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez-Fletcher's measure to reform Sandag. So that passed this week, and it's on to the governor. And he's always a wild card, especially when it comes to things that deal with a specific city. So sometimes he'll say, I don't want to sign this bill because it just deals with a problem that Santa Clarita or whoever should fix itself. But, I think she's been known to do a lot of working behind the scenes. So it's very possible that she's already secured his support. And
she even acknowledged that she pushed him to support 805 when he pushed her to support that gas tax, right?
So it's possible they've already secured some sort of understanding, and it was just a matter of getting it to his desk.
So the bill would do two major things. It would, change the governance so that basically the biggest cities have more representation on the board of directors of Sandag, which would have the impact of probably supporting more of the transit and types of projects that they support for planning and funding. But then the second part is it adds an audit committee function, right? So it has more of an oversight of the finances, which is a direct result of our own investigations on that.
Yeah, so there's another piece of it that's come into play this week also, which is that it would let individual transit agencies create their own tax measures. So, we saw Measure A fail, and now everything's kind of back to the drawing board. But places like MTS or the North County Transit District could float their own taxes. And so that's something that some of those politicians have found really attractive. So like Encinitas actually supported the bill this week precisely because they were like, North County Transit District needs money and we want it to get the money.
Yeah, interesting. All right. So we're going to wait. Now the governor has till when to make these decisions?
October 15th.
Okay. Well, thank you. You seem to know that stuff pretty well. All right. Our hero of the week. So thank you, by the way, for your responses to our question about whether we should keep hero going. I've got a bunch, mostly saying, well, if you want to change it, it'd be fine, but it's fine. And Andy's not right, which is very heartwarming.
Very heartening to you, I'm sure.
This week's hero we're going to give to Dan McSwain. He's been the business columnist or just columnist at the UT for a couple of years now. Had some really heartfelt columns about his experience with alcoholism and depression and homelessness even, but also he's just an astute business writer and had some just standout columns of accountability and stuff about the mayor and about the Chargers and all that stuff. And it was just a bummer to read that he's giving it up. It was kind of an odd column where it was very moving to a lot of people, but it also seemed to indicate that he felt like he was slipping or something, and
alluded to some health problems, but maybe not.
Yeah, if he's slipping, it's hard to imagine because he's one of the sharpest thinkers in town. But anyway, it really hit me too, also because it feels like the ranks of those of us kind of holding the line on accountability reporting in town are just continually dissolving away.
Yeah. We saw a lot of national talk this week about like reporters having opinions. You know, there was an ESPN reporter who expressed an opinion, and that's very bad. And so just locally having somebody who has such a voice and who is willing to express, you know, outrage when it's necessary and praise when it's necessary is like so valuable.
Especially when it's as clear thinking as that. Right. I mean, that was just, you did great reporting, great analytical stuff. So, well, bummer. I guess we'll keep trying to do better. Our goat of the week.
You lose! Good day, sir!
So this one, shock of shocks, goes to San Diego Unified. So one possibility we didn't discuss is just calling the goat instead the San Diego Unified of the week.
Yeah, that would be
this week's San Diego Unified is in fact San Diego Unified.
We had that idea to do the funny thing about the Sacramento report, just call it like the ferret of the week, right?
Yeah.
To just talk about whatever weird issue they seem to be grabbing onto.
So this was one that made me particularly angry is the spokeswoman for the school district wrote a tweet about how they had closed lots of public records requests at the quickest pace in recent memory, #progress, #transparency. This is like, I don't even know an equivalent, but like if I bragged about being the world's greatest opera singer or just something that I am like so very not.
Yeah.
I can't imagine a worse candidate to brag about transparency. You know, a court recently found in our favor that they had illegally withheld emails.
We have standing requests out that are hundreds of days
Hundreds of days. You know, Mario just got back a request that he put in a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And within hours of that tweet, they had pushed back other long delayed public records requests for like another 6 weeks.
So happy to see progress, but it needed to have more tact than that. But also, like, just don't talk to us about transparency now. And I guess they want to come in, have discussions and stuff like this, but like, we need to get some of these responses, and we need to get them quick.
And so does every reporter in town. This isn't just about us. And so do parents. And so does anyone who deserves information from a public agency.
All right. Well, stay tuned for Chris Ward if you're on the podcast. He's going to talk about these issues and more. And for those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo, thanks for joining us. This has been the Voice of San Diego on podcast.
This podcast is sponsored in part by San Diego Life Changing, a campaign that highlights real stories of people who are impacting the world and upgrading their lives straight from San Diego. This campaign officially launches on September 19th at Petco Park when the Padres take on the Diamondbacks. Join us in celebrating everything that makes San Diego the best place to live and work. Visit padres.com/San Diego Life Changing to purchase your VIP tickets using promo code SDLifeChanging.
Okay, we are joined in the Great Voice San Diego podcast studio in downtown San Diego by Councilman Chris Ward. He is the Democrat from District 3. Welcome, Chris.
Good to be here.
So you had a big week.
It was a big week. Council is back for fall session, and we had a lot on the agenda, so I'm excited to get into it.
So there was the marijuana regulations on Monday, and then on Wednesday you had the big discussion about homelessness. So let's start with that. That seems to be, I got to say, this feels like the biggest story of the year so far. I mean, there's a lot of things we've uncovered. There's sandbag, there's all kinds of stuff, but this is really capturing not only the city's attention, but now nationally and even internationally, the discussion about hepatitis and stuff. So
people dying tends to do that.
Focus the mind, yeah. All right, so what did you announce Wednesday, and what sticks out for you about it?
So on Wednesday, the mayor announced that a decision was made. We are moving forward on 3 locations where large tent structures that will serve as bridge housing can go up to be able to get, approximately 500 to 700 people off of our streets.
So, yeah, you described it as temporary bridge structures.
I noticed that you've commented on Twitter, yes. It's not a bridge.
Yeah. So
it's a bridge to permanent housing.
Let's be clear. So, yeah, it's not under a bridge. That's not a fake bridge. It's just.
It's a metaphorical bridge.
Got it. So that was going to be my question. What's it a bridge to in your mind? Is that clear? At least it might be to you. Is it clear to the whole group that's describing it that way?
Look, fundamentally, we know that the biggest challenge facing homelessness is that we just don't have enough low and extremely low income housing to be able to support those that are falling into homeless or those who have been chronically homeless. Buildings don't build themselves overnight. So what do you do in the meantime? As I've really entered this space as my first year as a council member, I've really grasped the issue of homelessness. I really wanted to try to own it, and it's complex. But I know we want to stay on the course for housing first related principles. I'm committed to that. But a lot of that's not going to materialize for 3,500 plus units and immediately. We need to do something more immediately, and this is one of those solutions.
So 3,500, is that the number that you're going with?
I'm throwing out that ballpark right now. It's obviously a huge goal to even get to that point.
Yeah.
But when I look in the city of San Diego at last year's point in time count, 3,500 unsheltered, that is the number that I would just like to get to in at least be able to plan for in the near horizon.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing our colleague Lisa pointed out is the locations of these shelters either have been discussed for a long time or were previously the locations of shelters. So given that, do you think that this decision could have been made sooner? It seems like it's only once we have like a literal body count that somebody said, okay, these locations are fine, we're going to move forward.
Sure, decisions could have been made sooner. I don't want to rehash, the recent past. I'm grateful that a decision was made this week. As you probably know, I have been pushing since March, since we had the special city council meeting on homelessness, for a litany of ideas that have just had fits and starts and very little movement from colleagues out of City Hall. And then again in July, I issued a very specific memorandum that included additional specific sites where I wanted to see new facilities go into. We had to report back to those ideas at my council committee this Wednesday. But I guess my point is, to your question, Sarah, yes, I think that things could have been done sooner, but they weren't, and now things are. So I'm grateful for that, and I want to keep the momentum going and do more on top of that.
How many beds are we talking about?
So they say that the capacity would be about 250 apiece, depending on how they are designed and functioned. I do want to advocate for one to be limited for women and couples and children. I think that that's a subpopulation that is particularly sensitive to coming into large shelters. We know that the Veterans Village operated site that's going to be in the Midway district is going to be meant for veterans who are homeless. So, whether we achieve 250 actual functional spaces in each is a cap. But it's going to be probably somewhere between 500 to 750 total.
I think that's what struck me about the discussion yesterday was that it seems like there's a lot of unknowns. There's don't know when they're going to go up, don't know exactly that those are the spots, or there might be other spots, don't know how they're going to be paid for. Is that fair?
It's fair, and I think what the mayor was trying to do was to set expectations. So yes, we'd like to see these get up in December. I do believe that we can get them up faster, but we would hate to tell the public we're going to get these up in 30 days, and then something happens where we just weren't able to hit that. That would certainly be a lot of egg on our face. So, I think again the point of the announcement Wednesday, was a decision has been made. We have decided on locations. That's been the biggest thing that has been, I think, challenging us to be able to move forward on an idea, because, of course, there's no one perfect location. Of course, there's going to be objectionable neighbors or other challenges around a site. You just got to make that decision and move forward, and that's what happened on Wednesday.
Now, did you say that it's laid out that there's going to be a shelter for women and couples, or that's just a goal that you're pushing for?
This is my goal.
Okay. I think that's a really good point, because I'm just going to go ahead and co-opt all of Lisa's work. But something that we encounter a lot is this idea that people don't want to go into shelter and that they just want to stay out on the streets for whatever reason so they can do drugs, or I don't know what people's conception is, but there are actually a lot of barriers to going into a shelter on top of them just being full. There are curfews, there are rules that you can't be with your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend, you can't bring a pet and things like that. And so these comforts that people have come to depend on and really are all they have, they're not so willing to abandon.
And historically, that has been a problem, just operationally. And yes, people don't want to access sites because there's either a barrier that's, I think, a reasonable barrier to overcome, or they've had a negative experience. They've felt threatened. There is just not enough security at some of these locations. And that's particularly an issue for single women. So we want to try to make sure that as these are programmed out fast, so we can get them up fast, that we have some of those past experiences in mind. And I want to be at the table to help guide the design and the operation of those to meet the needs and experiences of those that have formerly been in shelters.
So you spent some time as a candidate and now as a councilman really investing in this and understanding it, talking to people, studying it. You're part of the regional task force. Can you let's go into that conception for a second about whether they really want to go into shelters or not. And I think that there's in my opinion, I mean, camping out with my friends in a street setting, as uncomfortable as it is, seems more attractive to me than going into one of those places. They're very. We had an event at the winter shelter that existed at the Newton site, I think, before. I mean, it's not a comfortable place. It's not an attractive place to be. I can understand rationally why you would want to be maybe clustered with your friends somewhere else, maybe on the street. What have you learned about that conception about whether they want to go into these sorts of places?
I think it depends on the individual. I think there are some individuals that just do not want to be forced into a specific place like that where they're with a collection of individuals. They like having their own space via, the inside of their tent. At least that's a 4x4 area they can call their own, or a 6x6 area. But there are a lot of people out there that are experiencing, the crime and the threats that are on the streets, right? A tent is not going to protect you from an intruder at 2 a.m. And people in the East Village are having those experiences. They are, accosted. There's we see the data. There's a high incidence of rape and violence that's occurring. And so I think if properly designed to learn from past lessons, we can have larger tents that help to meet that peace of mind need for individuals to feel secure enough to want to come in.
Do you think they'll fill right away?
We certainly have the capacity. We have the street population, so we will be pairing that up when we know we have an opening date. I'm sure the street outreach will be out there to identify the people that we can get in first.
If they filled all the way, would that be a perceptive? Could we perceive that dent in the population and the street life?
Well, let's put this, in context. We know the monthly count of downtown unsheltered people on our streets just spiked again in August to 1,400. So if I talk about getting 700 people off of the streets, it'd be the equivalent of cutting in half the number of people on downtown streets. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be significant.
Mm-hmm. And then, so let's talk about the bridge part for a sec.
That's right.
So the effort to create permanent housing opportunities. A lot of the discussion about what created this crisis has to do with the single family or the single room occupancy hotels and such that were lost downtown. Almost the same number were lost as some of the growth in homelessness downtown.
You're right.
How can we picture what's coming online in your opinion? What needs to come online?
I think to clarify what you said, the same number were lost as were produced for new low income. So I actually raised this on Wednesday. We had a response to a grand jury report about some of their findings and things that the city and county not been doing well. We had an accurate statement about what we're trying to do to use the Housing Commission and other systems to produce low-income housing, but I really wanted us to be honest and clarify that the important thing to do is produce net new housing. We've just basically been treading water. Meanwhile, more people have been falling into homelessness. The Housing Commission's plan that we released a couple of months ago, I think, is aggressive, is investing more of its resources. We have a total pie, and it's how do you allocate that pie to sort of make the best impact that you can across the population. And I think that those allocation shifts are going to be able to help us produce more net new emergency and very low income types of units. I think that the council already has approved another 620 over the summer timeframe, new affordable housing units. And look, you mentioned that we are losing a lot, either to demolition for new development, but we're actually at risk, I think, over the next 15 years of losing a lot just due to affordable housing covenants. Projects that were built in the 70s or 80s are coming up on their 45-year restrictions on affordability, and we're starting to see some of those flip right now. So I also represent Hillcrest, and when senior units are going for $900 a month now, but the owner comes in and says, well, unless you provide additional subsidy, I'm going to transition these to market rate. That means I have 50 seniors in a building that now are going to double in rent, and they will be out on the streets or in a different community after living there 20 years, and that's not fair. So I think we have a responsibility of the Housing Commission to be able to provide more subsidy to keep those affordable units there in perpetuity.
Let's explain what you're talking about for a second. So we have a form of rent control in a way in some of these buildings that were created for affordable housing, but it sunsets after a few decades. And what you're talking about is that there are projects where a lot of homes which with rent control right now are about to expire. And what you're talking about is that if the owners don't have some agreement in place, they might go to market rate, which as we've seen is higher and could throw some people out on the street.
And it has been happening, and I think it is. There is a tsunami coming if we don't get ahead of that. So the reason that I build that into my points is that, yes, I want to be committed to build net new housing, but I'm also mindful that there's a lot coming down the pike that we are about to lose just because of these sort of past agreements. So dollars being limited that they are, some of them need to go to new developments. Some of them do need to preserve existing affordable housing stock and rehabilitate that. And it's just finding that careful balance, that public decision about where are those dollars best allocated.
Speaking about housing more generally, there are a lot of plans on the table from people on the council, and the mayor has put out an outline of what he'd like to do on housing. Is there anything that you see as like being easiest to reach consensus on? Are there things that are low-hanging fruit that the council could agree on soon to make a dent in housing?
We certainly did that in July. That was some lowish hanging fruit that I think is going to make a small difference for people that want to build accessory dwelling units. And, you know, we're looking at the reforming the sustainable and expedited, sustainable and affordable expedited permitting program, which has not been meeting its stated goals. And I particularly want to focus that on the affordable side of the equation. People have been getting very crafty about what constitutes as sustainable. Therefore, they're entering the program. Therefore, there's more of those kinds of projects under review, and then it spreads out the workload over staff, and less affordable projects are actually achieving that stated goal in reduction of review time. But I'm getting a little wonky here.
Yeah. So the reason I brought up the number, or that I sort of seized on that number that you brought up, is I've been thirsty for somebody to set some goals. Do you know what I mean? To set some and I can't get anyone to identify specific number of units they want to get online. I can't get anybody to identify how many shelter beds we need to get online. It feels like there's like 5 different solutions to this problem in a portfolio. And I would really love to see a goal for each one set, and then we just start driving. And we could even have a website where it ticks off every time we get one online or something.
I could see you building a thermometer right now. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, we have nothing to really focus our minds, and so everybody's just kind of like confused and scared about this. Do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah. And so that's why I just lay that out there. If we know that we have 3,500 people on average on a given night in the streets of San Diego, then let's see how we can build 3,500 units.
Yeah, let me ask you this too. So there was some commentary in the UT from folks in the downtown neighborhood you represent, talking about wanting, and I don't know how ubiquitous this sentiment is, but wanting more strict, severe enforcement. And then a few other talk show types got into this yesterday. But it feels like that's a thing that could explode if it's not dealt with. That if people are angry and want more enforcement, that could be something that a populist grabs onto. What is your response to somebody who says, look, they should be arrested, they should be forced into a program, they should be somehow more severely dealt with rather than just lured?
Yeah, well, my neighbors, my business owners, they're right. We should be enforcing the laws. There are laws on the books that make it illegal to lodge on the sidewalk, to defecate in public. I mean, all those things are pretty obvious. Some of these laws have, we've rendered ourselves, we've had our hands tied by the courts. And so they're right to want that. But whether or not the police force can actually come in and do things, just outright, has been struck down by courts through a couple of pretty landmark cases. And I won't comment on whether we can get into whether they're righteous or wrong-headed. but they are what they are. So we're trying to operate within the bounds of what the law allows us to do. So, for example, coming in there and cleaning out the sidewalks, get all these illegal tents off of the sidewalks. Well, we have to post 72 hours in advance and make sure there's notification and make sure that people's belongings are protected if we do come by 72 hours later and take them off. So, we're trying to operate within the bounds of what previous court cases. And of course, now, earlier this summer, we had a new class action suit by, I think, 10 homeless individuals that are tired of getting encroachment tickets. Mm-hmm. You covered this, right? Encroachment is something historically that's been used. If you roll a dumpster out into the sidewalk, you can't do that. So now we're saying that, people in their tents are dumpsters, and we're using encroachment as a rationale for ticketing. So now the ability to enforce encroachment laws may be struck down by the courts as well. We're getting into, the art of the possible here, but we're just really, chasing our tail around in a circle. We really need to create that pipeline, create new units, create temporary bridge structures, whatever you want to call them, so that we have the places that people can go. And when you have those places that people can go, then you can come in behind and enforce. That's where we can actually meet the test of the court.
So that's a fair, it's fair to attribute some of the motivation to the structures to wanting to be able to say, look, you have a place to go, and so we can enforce some of these rules better on the sidewalks.
That's right. You have a place to go. I am offering you an alternative. That's where the court came down and they said, you can't give them a ticket for lodging here if there's nowhere for them to go. Another case was, whether or not we can, disrupt them in the middle of the night. People have a right to rest, so we're not allowed to do a lot of the day-to-day enforcement between 9 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. because people have the right to sleep. So if we have outlets, if we have places for them to go, if we have ways to resolve this, then I think they can be compelled to do so.
Well, do you have any other points on this? Well, let's transition to the marijuana regulations. So,
sure.
I spent some time digging into this last week and learned. I think it was interesting. Basically, the delivery guys wanted you guys to consider more delivery permits. That didn't come up. Was that ever a consideration?
I don't know. I wasn't working close enough with staff to know whether or not they were wanting to build that in. But what did come before us, what I was told was always coming before us, was working on other elements of the supply distribution chain.
Right. And so the staff had recommended sort of two options. One would be what I called the Shelley Zimmerman option, which was don't allow any distribution, cultivation, manufacture, or test, or just
testing.
Yeah, just allow testing.
Right.
And in these council districts. And then the second option was just allow all four of those, but only two per council district. Then you made a motion and said, no, not per council district, and let's do a 40 total cap. How did you come up with 40?
So in working with industry leaders, look, I think I approach this trying to be very practical about just the realities. I think you might have heard me comment before. I'm very sensitive to trying to transform what is otherwise happening around us every day, relegated to an underground black market, and really bring that out in the open and try to regulate it, tax it, control it. I think that those are all going to get us to the goals of public safety and public health attributes that we want. So in the guise of that, I'm talking to industry, rely on them that they believe about 30 to 50, we hit 40 as the midpoint, facilities citywide would be able to meet the demand for production and cultivation and distribution. And I'm using, I guess, their industry perspective to be able to guide that number. If we're looking at something in Denver, everyone tries to look at what's Denver doing, or Seattle or Portland, but Denver, I guess, has over 300 licensed facilities. So for that experience, 40 seems like a reasonable first step for something the size of the city of San Diego.
Mm-hmm. Do you think San Diego now has a chance to be more of a center, or more of a, or is it just, look, you just did your best to accommodate some of the demand and we'll see what happens?
I think it's a first target, and I don't.
I mean, I guess my question: were you aiming for San Diego to be able to take a leadership role in
to
the
be the
business
new
and
craft
the industry?
bud hub
Sure.
of the state? Well, I think we're going to have some competition with other parts of the states
Maybe
as well.
a little bit, yeah.
No, we're looking to be able to keep it local. And that's another important element.
Not have to ship it in.
Correct, right, yeah. And then you're placing product and cash, like, in long distances, which greatens the risk of robbery or other problems. So
They were talking about there being between 200 and 300 unlicensed delivery services out there. That right now, the only licensed delivery services can go with the licensed shops out there, and there's only 17 of them.
Right.
At least permits going out. And so at most there'd be 17 delivery services. That means a pretty significant crackdown. Is that a crackdown you would support?
I would. Just like we had to, really crack down, and I think we've done a good job of reducing illegal dispensaries that are currently under the medical marijuana timeframe. Those were creating severe neighborhood impacts. We didn't know who was who. They didn't have the proper controls. They didn't go through the proper regulatory processes to get up and running and have, I think, sufficient on-site protections that would reduce neighborhood impacts. And so, there was a concerted effort to shut many of them down, and I'm happy the ones that went through the process, that are lawfully operating, are doing so with little to no impact on the neighborhood.
We saw, like Scott mentioned, Shelley Zimmerman making the case that only testing facilities would be allowed or should be allowed. And that was based on, this idea that it's going to impact public safety. And we've run several op-eds from council members in other parts of the county essentially saying, don't let this into our communities. Just basically think of the children. And it's all sounded like pretty hysterical to me. There are obvious concerns, these are cash businesses largely. There are definitely safety concerns, but like where on the spectrum do you think is like reality when it just seems like there's hysteria and then there's the fact that this is legal and people voted for it, and what's the balance?
Well, I think I'm on the other end of the spectrum that you referenced, and I agree with a lot of your characterization. We've had hysteria around this issue for decades, as long as we were growing up in the 80s and probably even before. And it hasn't changed a lot of the metrics, right? You don't see, I think youth rate today is no different than it was a generation ago. So the DARE program, Just Say No, an abolitionist or a prohibitionist type of approach is just not produce what they wanted to. I think it's actually had disproportionate impacts on certain communities that already are challenged as it is. So, I think we just got to flip that around a little bit. I think that there is a way to responsibly allow adults to be able to, use this recreationally with strict controls. I think it'll be instituted in a way, brought out in the open, that does not have neighborhood impacts. And so, yes, I did hear from many of those voices, parents and, mental health professionals and our police chief that said that, the sky was going to fall and every kid was going to turn to dope and, the world was going to end. If we allowed the supply chain, which, by the way, we already decided we're going to allow retail sales. We already decided Prop 64.
Right. This sounds even more removed from that. Like it's a testing facility.
Monday's decision was more removed from that. I think it actually, I argue, would actually enhance public safety issues. But let's turn to the data out of Colorado and out of Washington and out of Oregon that shows that there has not been an increase in DUIs, people under the influence of marijuana, that there has not been an increase in youth use rate. All these other metrics that people say are going to happen here in San Diego, we actually have real world data where it's been lawful and commercialized for over 2 years. So drawing from that data, I even had a quote. I'm sure it wasn't happy for Shelley's perspective that I read this on the dais, but we had a quote from the chief of the California Police Officers Association that said, in 2014 we legalized it. A lot of us had a lot of concerns around that. To date, none of these concerns had been borne out. And so we actually also had, surprise, some sergeant from the Santa Ana Police Department, I think it was, testify on Monday as well. And I was surprised by her testimony because she came out to basically be fully in support of what we were trying to do. I think it adds public safety elements if we know who's cultivating it, where they are, how they're operating it, and we can regulate that.
We brought up Shelley Zimmerman. She's leaving next year. There's a process to replace her. There's been some concern among community groups that there wasn't enough public outreach opportunities for that, and that some of the people who would be helping make this decision were being sort of cloaked and not revealed and protected from public input. So do you share any of that concerns? Do you feel like it's going well? What's up?
It's going well, not as well as it could have gone when it all rolled out. But I think that there have been some course corrections that have responded to some of those concerns. I do share those concerns. Some of those corrections have been increasing the number and availability and access for community members to have input. So we went from 4 locations to 6, and actually one of them in my district, in District 3, was modified in its location. We are, I'm told there's going to be a recruitment process for the recruiter, so that'll be a little more open. Who are we actually going to choose to engage community members to help define the police chief search, and then set out to look nationally to and within our own police department to meet that criteria. So again, who's guiding the process and the decision making? I think it's important for people to be a part of setting that up. And then, the review panel itself, some have alleged it's going to be a secret panel, or there's only going to be 4 hand-selected individuals. I think council members are being approached for, their input on how the composition of that should look, and nothing has been decided. I met just this week with city leadership, and they have no set number or set composition. So all of this is in development, and I think we have an opportunity to help inform that, and I hope to the best extent that we can that interest is met.
So one of the things that happened, so I had some snark earlier about we have this mayor in LA who rejected investment in the NFL and then got 2 NFL teams. In the meantime, while their homelessness crisis was raging, they got a massive investment in housing and homelessness. There was some discussion about the mayor's office hit me back and said, well, look, we tried to get some money raised through a tax increase for homelessness here, and that was shot down by the council. That was attached to a bigger other thing, and not necessarily it was supposed to come up again, from my understanding. So what is happening? Are you aiming for more funding? Are you still going to aim for a tax increase for a convention center? Where's your feeling on funding for homelessness and funding for some of these other infrastructure efforts?
Yes and yes. Okay. So I do think, as I stated in June, that we should be separating the question. Expanding the convention center is important to me. I represent that facility and the neighborhoods here, and I certainly personally believe that it's the right way to go, and we should have done that 4 years ago. I testified to Coastal in 2012 that I thought that it was the right project to move forward on. But fast forward to where we are today, we still need to find a lawful and correct way to be able to finance that. And I hope but I think everything, of course, got complicated by tying these issues together. Now, because then you're able to compare within that funding proposal, the lens becomes, oh, well, you're giving 2/3 of the money to this and only, 1/6 of the money to homeless. Then it becomes a measure of your priorities, and that wasn't a fair comparison, right? Separate the question. Yes, we need, a major measure on affordable housing dollars and homelessness support locally, just like Los Angeles did twice, just like 5 other counties did across the state last November. We missed the boat then. I'm not looking, behind us, but looking forward to 2018. I plan to be as active as I can. I don't know if this is going to go through a citizens initiative route, in which case I got to dissociate from that. But for the meantime, I'm, listening and sort of actively working with those in the housing world to help share my points of view about the elements that need to go into a proposal. You brought up, and I regret that it gets brought up, but let me just comment real quick, the decision that was made and that the council somehow didn't care about homelessness dollars. I fundamentally believe that was on a quest to fail. We were never going to achieve a 2/3 vote on a special election in November for that question. We just weren't. So for me to have said, yes, I'll approve $5 million of general fund would be literally flushing it down the toilet. That money is sitting in an account right now.
You mean
maybe
the money to hold
a special election.
For the election, yeah.
So maybe we can tap into some of that $5 million now to be able to fund the temporary bridge structures, right? So.
Mm-hmm. So you hinted at it. Let me just pull this part out. What is the discussion going on right now about whether that 2/3 requirement is applicable to a citizens initiative? There was some we read the ruling one way. There's some other folks reading it another way. Is that an active discussion in your world about it being perhaps more viable as a citizens initiative than as a city council initiative?
I wouldn't say an active discussion, but it certainly has been actively acknowledged that the landscape has changed. And we know that there are a number of citizens interest groups that have the capacity and want to be able to take the leadership role on that. And if the threshold is lesser for them to be able to achieve the same end, then maybe that's the best way for all of this to shake out.
Councilman Chris Ward, appreciate your time.
Good to be here.
The show you just heard was part of the Voice of San Diego podcast network. To hear other great shows like the Voice of San Diego podcast, I Made It in San Diego, a show all about the people behind the region's businesses, The Kept Faith, a San Diego sports show, the binational Curacaos podcast, Startup Vault, the San Diego Beer Talk Radio, and more, please visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcasts. If you'd like to sponsor any of the podcasts, please email Aaron at voiceofsandiego.org. That's ERIN@VOSD.org.